All right, everyone, welcome to Wellness for the Hot Mess. I'm laughing, I'm smiling because, of course, when our guest shows up on the Zoom, I kind of want to chat and ask some questions. And with this particular guest, I should have just known to roll the tapes, because when we used to have our own podcast, we would just roll the tapes, and the first 10 minutes of conversation in every show are always the best. And so I just want to introduce our guest, Tony Dufresne. He is a PhD in philosophy and consciousness studies, which is, I mean, it's just full circle with all the work that I'm doing. I met this dude at a bar in Scottsdale, and
we need more context. Because that could go either way.
No, totally. He came into my life when I was in my early 20s, and we just had the best conversation. And when you know you're supposed to be friends with somebody, you just know. And so without thinking anything of it, we really just started this relationship that was so deep, and it was based off of so much talk about consciousness and subconsciousness. And I had so many questions at that time in my life. I mean, I still do. And it seemed like he had so many answers, at least in certain topics. And so I'm so excited to bring him here, because I know that this conversation is just going to go wherever the fuck it's supposed to go. So welcome to Wellness for the Hot Mess, Tony D.
Hey, thanks, Lex. You know, this is going to be just like we started 8 years ago, and Walk of Shame was the podcast, and really that just says it all. It was the Walk of Shame radio podcast, and it was liquid gold. The first 10 or 15 minutes was just gold. Every time.
Gold.
Right.
Yeah.
When we first just started wrapping it down, if we weren't like super hammered, because that did happen a lot.
Yeah, totally. Days. Well, you must have met me. So for those of you who don't know, Tony and I had a podcast 8 years ago. The first iteration was called what was it called? Walk of Shame Radio Podcast.
Yeah.
The second iteration was called Brilliant Idiots, which I think is so beautiful. And then he has kind of created his own beautiful monster in the podcast scene and in the wellness scene and in the self-help scene. But why we called it Walk of Shame Radio Podcast was because I was, and he was also dating. We were both
I was
dating around, exploring the aspects of humanness in other people. And I had never really met anyone, Tony, that liked dating, because I liked dating. And at that age, you meet a lot of people that are like, I hate dating, I want to settle down, or I'm bad at this, or dating brings up a lot of insecurities. And at that point in my life, I really fucking loved dating, because I learned a lot about myself when I would go on dates. I learned a lot about the human experience. And I remember bringing that to you, and you also being like, yeah, it's the most fun.
I think it's great because it challenges you to kind of show up and be present, understand more and more about who you are, what you have to offer. You know, prior to us meeting each other and then starting that whole process, you know, I had already gotten my PhD. My base was, when I was in grad school, I was a couples and a family systems therapist. And so the couples thing and the dating thing, the sexuality aspect of it, the man, woman, the triangulation, all that fun stuff, I loved it. I just think it's so fascinating. And that's why I think dating is such a great thing, because it really does allow you to learn a lot. If you're, what's the term that you use a lot? You know, kind of like, if you're not in process, but if you show up, right? If you are there, if you are present, if you are open to it. So, and that's why I think we had so much material to go off of with the walk of shame stuff. And I think it continues on today, doesn't it? Because essentially it's just understanding yourself, number one, right? And then it's human behavior and interaction and level and empathy and
Yes.
levels of understanding. And then either you choose in or you choose out, right? You either choose
Yeah.
in that you want to be a part of a community or a relationship or some sort of a system, or you choose out and say, yeah, fuck it. I don't want to at this point. And either way is fine, right? But it's a
Right.
matter of, and the thing that kills me is the lack of integrity that happens. If you're going to choose out, then choose out and then own it, right? Or if you're
Yeah.
going to choose in, then do that and then own that too. And that's what, and we talk about that a lot. My big client base is women, 25 to 35 in transition, going through the, should I get married, have kids, or should I career, going through just, what the hell should I do, or purpose stuff. Also going through, how am I going to navigate through this systemic
Yeah.
masculine environment
Yes.
that, I mean, let's be honest, it's still around.
Yes.
It's still what you guys operate in. And it's not going anywhere in the near future. So you have to figure all that stuff out. And I love working with that client base. And
Yeah.
interestingly enough, I didn't really ask to do that. But as a girl dad, I think I just give off the vibe where I sort of connect as much as I can as a man, right? I can only
Yeah.
connect to a certain level. And I love that age. And that's the age that actually I think you were about that age when we first met, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think I was like, I think it was 24 or 25.
Yeah.
And I have an array of different friends, from colors to ages to sizes, whatever. I just, being a bartender, for so long, and just, it's in my nature to be attracted to what I'm attracted to, the energy, the conversation, the depth that we can go. And there are so many things coming up as you speak. One of the things that's coming up is, when it comes to the human experience, it's all about presence. So whether you're dating, starting a new job, want to get out of a relationship, you want to start a new job, you want to, get into wellness, it all comes down to, well, how, like, let's be real. How honest are you able to be with yourself about your capacity to be present? And if you are not present, what is keeping you from being present? And are you honest with yourself enough to say, fuck, I'm not being present because I don't know how to be present. I'm not being present because I'm almost like self-sabotaging. So I would just love you to go on presence. And what do you see from your clients when it comes to their growth and their elevation, and like, what is keeping them from that?
There's a thing called the trans-theoretical model of change. And it's that, people think, oh, I'm going to decide to make a change. I'm going to decide to be present. I'm going to decide to do this. You can think that that's the case. You can want to make, and a lot of times that has to do with leverage, right? It has to do with your life is going pretty shitty, or you want to make a change, or you're with somebody that's not jiving with you and you just need to like start over or do something different. And you get into that situation and you want to, right? And so you say, oh, I want to be present. I want to, understand things more, but now wanting to and being able to sometimes don't mesh up. Right. And that's super frustrating, right? And I get a lot of clients that come in, and I got to tell you, and it's funny because I was just talking to a client a couple of days ago. I said, she came in and said, it's really weird. I came in because I had a relationship problem with my boyfriend, and we ended up dealing with something totally different, 3 months later. I said, I have to tell you, not 99%, like 100% of the time when I deal with clients, that's the fuel to the fire. Yeah. It's the relationship thing with that age. It really is. And that's the thing that sort of gets you to come to Jesus in terms of, oh man, this is just not working for me. And I'm getting older. And then, you got the quarter life thing happen, and women in 30 is a big deal, a big deal. So in terms of the presence and wanting to be, it's so that the trans-theoretical model of changes, you can want to, but if you're not at that level, there's like 4 steps. But if you're not at the level where you have enough leverage to where you're like, I'm going to make it happen, then you're not going to. You're going to want to, and then you're going to go and you're going to say, well, I've done my due diligence, right? I've gone to therapy or I've talked to my friends, and it's still not changing. And then the victim thing kind of kicks in.
Right.
It only takes the way that it happens usually in terms of presence and getting to an understanding of like the depth of understanding, the leverage has to be there. You can self-generate the leverage, where you can go, you know what? I'm done. That's it. I deserve more. And that's the one thing I say to my clients all the time. You have to tell yourself you deserve it. You deserve it. Yeah. So many, they just don't think that they do. I mean,
it's almost like the presence piece has to come in where they're actually seeing clearly what they deserve more of, or they're actually seeing clearly what they've been settling for. I think in my relationship before, my relationship before my husband, and I don't know if I've shared this story before on here, but I was with a partner and me and my husband were friends. Mm-hmm. And I could truthfully say I had no feelings for my husband at that time when I was with my partner until I did.
I can vouch for that too.
Yeah. And it was,
because we talked about that a lot.
Yes, exactly. And it was a pattern of mine. And I will just be so real. My husband is I've shared this on here. My husband is the only man I have never cheated on. And I did cheat on my past partner with my husband. And obviously I'm not proud of that. And obviously I don't condone cheating, but there is nuance to it. And I will fucking say that, even if it's not a popular opinion. So what I'm getting at is my past relationship, I was present with it and it felt like what I was worthy of and it felt really good, but then something changes chemically. And I'm curious to know your perspective, but something just changed, or I all of a sudden became present, and I became more present with the reality of what it was. And the reality was, it was not a healthy relationship. The reality was, he had a lot of addiction stuff that I was trying to change, because my dad has a lot of addiction stuff that I was trying to change. And, I felt like I could support him. The reality was that he had a lot of trauma that I was letting myself stay small around, because the trauma at that point in my life, I didn't know how to deal with, but I loved him so much that I would be like, he's been through a lot of trauma. It's fine. But at the same time, it wasn't fine, because I wasn't receiving what I was worthy of. I was diminishing my worthiness because I did love this man, and this man was a good human, but it wasn't what my particular makeup as a human was worthy of. I mean, and now fast forward that I am with my husband, he shows me that I'm worthy of literally anything I could ever imagine. And so I would just love to know your perspective on that, because I'm sure we have listeners that are going through the same thing.
Yeah. Do you remember the straw that broke the camel's back? Like that final thing, or the final, little action, behavior, whatever, you finally said, whoa, and you had that shift all of a sudden to the introspection and the clarity of I deserve more and I deserve better than this. Do you remember?
Yeah. Do you guys want to know?
I do. I would love to know.
Oh my! As I pour myself more tea, I give the tea.
As you're microdosing, I'm hydrating.
Wait, this is hilarious, because if you're watching this on YouTube, I go to sip my tea and Tony goes, "Are you like microdosing right now?" And I was like, "I'm always microdosing."
That's just because I've known you for 10 years, Lex. I know what's going on.
Now it's microdosing. Before, I would show up to recordings and just like take a big bong rip. So yes, I remember the drinking was always something. And you got to remember, this was in my mid-20s. So we were partying, we worked at a restaurant, right? It was a thing, but the drinking always put off a red flag for me. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was when he didn't come home until, no, it was 4 a.m. And I still am triggered by this with my now relationship with my husband. And he knows that. He knows that if he is ever going to stay out late, usually I'll lose my shit regardless of what the fuck he's doing. But he knows that even 2 a.m., 1 a.m., 12:30 without telling me what he's doing, it's an issue for me. And I do realize that maybe that sounds a little crazy, but based off of my past triggers, it's a real physiological response that comes over me. So it was 4 a.m. I remember I woke up and I'm like, where are you? And I wasn't worried about him cheating because I knew he wouldn't do that to me. Like I literally genuinely was not worried about him cheating on me, but I literally genuinely was so confused why hanging in a back alley, like with his friends after a shift at the restaurant, drinking, and I'm sure doing other drugs was more important than coming home to his live-in girlfriend, you know, when I said like, hey, don't be home so late tonight. And he didn't think it was an issue. And that is almost, it wasn't the act of staying out until 4 a.m. It was the act that I could really feel that he didn't see the issue with choosing to drink, choosing to do drugs with his friends over being with his girlfriend.
Had you guys had the discussions about how that was not acceptable to you? Did you lay that boundary down prior to that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I can't really like recall exactly. I'm sure I could have communicated it maybe better, but also, you know, he knew. He knew me. See, I'm like, he knew.
Right. And again, that's the point. That's why I wanted to bring that up, because pattern recognition only happens when you hit a leverage point, right? And everybody has their own. Some people, it takes a huge loss in their life, like either their personal loss or somebody in their life, you know, or it's a huge betrayal or something like that. Some people just get to the point where that little something that triggers something, and it's not a small thing, and it should be validated, because everybody has their triggers and you should own them. I mean, that's really the number one thing. You got to own your triggers, because they are what they are, right? Even though they might have happened for the wrong reasons, or they might have happened to you indirectly, or they may not even happen to you the way you remember them, but they're still a trigger, right? The one thing that I really stress to my clients is you got to own those, right? They're not going to go away. But what you can change is you can change the reaction to those. And so that's the whole thing about the trigger hits the amygdala, right? The little part back here, little lizard brain, which is the fight, flight, you know, freeze, all that stuff. That's like the initial impulse that comes in. And then it comes up to the prefrontal cortex right here, up here in front. That's the rational brain. And as they say, if we're 22 or older, then it's fully developed. Some people, I highly doubt that that's the fact. But, and I've known some 3-year-olds who probably have a fully developed one. But anyway, right. So it goes up to the rational part. That's where you can start to control it. The impulse is going to come up regardless, right? Those are the triggers. When it gets to the prefrontal, if you train yourself, if you have pattern interrupt, if you have pattern recognition, which you did finally, you realize that, right, the pattern was there. And it's not necessarily just him. It's like from your past and from family relationships and all that, right? And all of a sudden it triggers you, and then you realize, okay, this is not going to be working for me. So once you get to the point where you have clarity and you have and you can recognize those patterns that come up, then you're ahead of the game. And then the hard part though, right? Because then it takes the courage to face the fear of either being alone or making a big change.
Yes, let's talk about that. That is the hard part, is not the trigger. The trigger will happen. The hard part is deciding what to do with the trigger. So on this podcast, we talk about you know, the moments we're feeling really aligned and connected. And then we talk about the moments we're triggered and what do we do? Because it's like beyond the trigger, then comes aligned and connected again. And then there's another trigger, and it's like this growth opportunity to act on what the trigger, what information inside of the trigger is telling you. And so in this example, the trigger was, I'm done with this. This is crazy. Like, this is crazy. I deserve more. I am worthy of more. But yeah, then it was like the in between was, okay, now I'm going to be single again. Okay, how is he going to get his shit out of my house? Okay, I hope he doesn't hurt himself because I know his mental health isn't the best. Okay, How am I going to tell my parents that this relationship isn't what I thought it was? So all of that gray area in between, I think, keeps a lot of our community, I know y'all can relate to this, keeps a lot of people playing small in the unworthiness.
Yeah, 100%. Because all that other stuff that comes up, the baggage and all of the, the details that
Yep.
if you're not strong in your presence, if you're not strong in your true confidence, if your ego is raging, right? If you're in a fear-based mode, all those little things are going to add up to you talking yourself out of making the move. You're going to rationalize staying in. Well, I have to, because if I leave, then he may harm himself. Well, I have to because my parents will be super upset. Maybe he's not that bad of a guy. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's my problem that I'm not forgiving enough that he's out till 4 a.m, right? And then you shift it back on yourself instead of staying true to your initial thought, your introspective base, your ideals, your truth, and knowing that you don't deserve that. It's just it's a hard thing to do. It really is. I mean, nobody should candy coat that. It really is. And you were talking about, shifting from, being present and being grounded to being just a dumpster fire, right? The biggest misnomer I have had with clients, and this goes to like traditional therapy or coaching or anything, is that once you attain a level of self-realization in the gradient, right? Then you're cool. Everything's good. You're done, right? Not even close. We all live on the scale, right? On the gray scale. We have sometimes when we're at a high level frequency, sometimes we're at a low level. Sometimes we vacillate in between. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's right. It's a pyramid. And the low level people, all they're looking for is food and shelter and somebody to, have sex with and, have a kid and whatever. And at the very top of the hierarchy of needs is self-realization. Well, the thing is that you have to live in the pyramid. Right. You can't just live at the top of the pyramid. You kind of live in the entire thing. So it's okay. I think what this boils down to is you just got to ease up on yourself and be a little more compassionate with yourself and understand this journey we're all on can be a bitch sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like the more you become conscious, the more you become present, for me at least, I guess the more triggering it is when I'm not living up to my full potential, because I know my full potential and I'm learning so much about myself every single day that when I do have moments that feel like a hot mess moment, I sometimes shame myself and I'm like, why the fuck am I here again? And I know there is levels to this shit. I feel like I'm currently going through, in my present life, another level of growth and evolution, and I'm here for it. I just didn't know it was going to come right now. I was cruising. I even told a mentor the other day, I said, business is going really good. I'm excited to start creating based off the foundation that I made. I'm not really here for the burn it all down energy. Right. And then fast forward to this week, I'm like, oh, I got some shit to burn down.
Right. Burn that bitch to the ground. But that brings up a really great point. And the point is that on this constant journey for expansion, there's expansion and retraction and expansion and retraction. And because when you go to build a new foundation, a stronger foundation, a bigger foundation, you gotta, when you start it, you really don't, you're a little unfamiliar with it. You might make some mistakes and you have to like pull some shit up and then put it down again. That's the whole point. It's funny because you mentioned, I know, me, I'm a big, the Matrix guy. And I talked about that constantly when we were doing our show, but it's true. The thing is, the more aware you become, the harder things are, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because you can't, because it's not like you can slip yourself back into the matrix, right? Once you take the blue pill, you're out of it, right? And now you can see things. If the more aware you become, the more aware of your patterns you become, the more aware of other people's patterns become. So there are now no excuses for you to stay with the people that are toxic. There's no more excuses for you to continue on with a behavioral pattern that's not beneficial to you or that's taking you in the wrong direction. So now, right, just like you said, now not only are you like pissed that you're in it, right? So you're hitting yourself with a hammer. Then you grab the other hammer, and now you're pissed because you know you should be there because you already know that you're in that thing, right? And so so it's like a double hit on that, and that's the hardest. That's the hardest part, and that's what makes it difficult. There is a way out of it, though.
Yeah, no, I want to touch on that because I know you work right now specifically with clients around imposter syndrome, and I know imposter syndrome. I mean, it's huge. It's something that we deal with if we're growing and if we're choosing to evolve. It's something that we're going to deal with. And everything you just said hit so hard because sometimes I feel like Bruce Almighty when he's receiving all those prayers in that scene. Like if I'm in a group of people or even just with social media these days, I feel like the awareness I have about the human experience based off of what I've studied and people I've worked with, almost is overwhelming sometimes to where I just want to shut it off. But I know that whole situation is a signal to me to explore this type of superpower. But then there's the imposter syndrome that comes in. It's like, okay, I want to teach about more. I know my business is evolving. I know my spiritual and my wellness practice is evolving, but then I feel myself in real time getting overwhelmed with imposter syndrome when I think about almost like, what will it take for me to be who I know I am meant to be?
You know, the imposter syndrome always happens with somebody that's expanding. It just is what, right? And somebody that has a level of introspection and consciousness, you know, that has a level of awareness and clarity, because we are aware. It's a whole thing where the really, really intelligent, intellectual, like expansive people are the ones that will tell you that they know the least. It's the whole Dunning-Kruger thing, you know, that whole Dunning-Kruger thing where if you're not intelligent, you really don't know that you're not intelligent, so you actually kind of pretend that you're intelligent, right? The more you know and the more you grow and the more you expand, the more you know that you don't know a lot of stuff. Exactly. And then imposter syndrome hits. And especially with women, and the women that I've worked with, 25 to 38 or whatever, like in that area, they're in positions like from a career aspect, or from a professional aspect of expanding and getting promoted and becoming more responsible. And in the context of being in like a misogynistic system, right? So there's already one hand tied behind their back because they have to deal with all this nonsense that even the guys in the office, they don't even understand that it's there, but it is, right? So they feel as though, just like you said earlier in the show, you have to prove yourself even more on something where you really don't. But that's where the imposter thing comes in. And it's a confusion between confidence, like true confidence, and competence. Because so many people get those two confused, because in an expansive nature, in a scenario where you're doing that and you're becoming now a leader or a supervisor or a coach like you, then you have this expectation that you're supposed to know everything for the people, for everybody who you know happen to be mentoring. But the power in your position now is your openness and vulnerability to the understanding that you don't know everything, but you're open to knowing more. And that's the key to getting into a supervisor, management, you know, all that stuff. The judgments that are going to be coming from the guys in the office or whomever in the office in terms of, you know, that's going to happen. You know, it's just, you can't control that. If people are based, you know, are fear-based, all they're going to do is try to knock other people down to bring themselves up, instead of the opposite, which is, you know, gratitude-based and consciousness-based, clarity-based, awareness-based, which is a rising tide brings all the ships up. And that's
Yeah.
and if you bring that attitude to the office, or if you bring that attitude to being a parent, or, being in a relationship, then that's going to be huge. And that's the way to combat imposter syndrome, is to just accept the fact that you're not competent in things, because
Totally.
you're not supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the imposter syndrome just comes from our fear of other people
Yeah.
thinking we're not good enough. When really, I think I don't know where I heard this, but I heard this somewhere that imposter syndrome is funny because it's almost shedding light on us thinking that we have like tricked our way to being in the position that we're in, or we've tricked our partner to thinking we're someone that we're not. And I'm sure there is truly manipulative people who can do that. I'm sure there is, but I know the community listening to this podcast are not that. I know I am not that. And so when I ever do start to feel imposter syndrome, or like, can I hold what is coming for me? I almost look back, and I look back at everything I have achieved and I have done and I have accomplished. And then I can ground all of that in to the present moment. I want to chat just a little bit about young Tony and how you got into, how you were even attracted to studying consciousness. And perhaps we do talk a lot on this show about how a lot of the stuff that we've had to heal, and a lot of the stuff that we are still healing, that stuff is guiding us into almost like who we're becoming. And so I'm just curious about who you were before you were this guy right here in front of me.
Yeah, my childhood was very constrictive. It was conservative. My first part of my book, I kind of set the table with that, and the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's because of a number of things. The first thing is that I was just very, depressed and disappointed. Didn't have a chance to really express who I was. Felt as though I was constantly judged. It was kind of an eggshell type of a thing that I grew up in. I grew up being a massive perfectionist. Expectation of if I didn't have if I had an A-, that was disappointing, right? In one of my classes. So with that, and then going into and choosing in my undergrad, choosing to go into business finance because I knew it would make people in my family proud. It wasn't really necessarily what I wanted to do, but I knew that would be the case. So I'm operating all wonky, right? It's all about exterior validation and all that nonsense. And of course, if you continue to operate that way, eventually you're gonna implode on yourself. Yeah. And I did, and I got out and I started a business, and I just imploded, and then all of a sudden I found myself married with a baby, like a baby, little, Rach was like tiny, and then the marriage was a hot mess, and so it was for like 10 minutes. And
was the marriage also because you thought that that's what you had to do to make people proud?
Yeah, absolutely. It was because, we needed to get married before she was born, so she could get baptized, and, it was a whole Catholic nonsense too. And that's a whole other show.
Yeah. Did you feel like you being married meant you were successful? Because my husband actually has a similar story. He got married really young, right out of college, because he felt like that would almost mean that he was doing everything in the right order, and that would show his family that he was successful.
It was mean. Yeah, it was a checkbox in the list. Yeah, to go down the list, right? Absolutely was. And I felt as though, and that was why it was so devastating when everything went to hell, just went to hell, and like very quickly. And we got divorced like within the year, I guess, give or take. And then it was very soon after that, there was a realization that she wasn't gonna cut it in terms of being a mom. She really didn't even want to be a mom in the first place. So I actually, about at a year or so, I had Rach the majority of the time. And so I was girl dad. I was 26, 27. I had a daughter. You talk about not knowing what the hell you're doing. I mean, I didn't know how to raise a
Talk
kid.
about imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Oh God, no kidding. Not only do I have it now, a little baby, it's a baby girl. So I'm like, oh, what the hell do I do with
Oh my
this?
God.
Right. So then you get immersed into this reality of being a parent, being a dad, and being a girl dad, and being a single dad, and then dealing with all those things. And that was the reason why I'm here. Now, what happened is that raising her, I saw a lot of stuff that I didn't see as a boy and as a young adult and as a young man, because from the girl perspective. And I mentioned that a couple times in my book. And then it got to the point where I really wanted to understand more and more the dynamics of my past relationship, the dynamics of kids and parents and the psychology. And I was just fascinated by that. I called a friend up, and she went through the Pepperdine graduate school. And of course, remember, I had a finance degree. So I called her up. I said, "Hey, can I get into Pepperdine at all? Because she knew some people there and stuff." And she said, "Well, yeah, I just, submit whatever, and, a little note and this and that." And I did, and they got me in. So I started at Pepperdine. And when I was 30, I was like 31 or 32.
I love so many pieces of this story because, speaking of imposter syndrome, you were put in a position where you really had to try your best to raise a conscious and aware human, and not just, a human, a woman, a young woman. And I have met his daughter, and she is incredible. And she is a mom of two beautiful kids. And so you've done great. But what I love about this story is that our story really does write the ways that we are supposed to support people, whether you're just supporting your friends or your family, or even you're just a very conscious human that works at a bank. You are supporting the people that you are in communication with. And then moving into your 30s, and you decided to go back to school because you wanted to know almost like how to raise Rachel, but the intricacies of the experience of a human raising a human, or a kid raising a kid, really. And this is what I want to share, is that if you are listening and there is something that you're attracted to, whether you know why you're attracted to it or not, follow that thread, because Tony has a podcast. He has a successful business. He's written a book, all because he decided to go back to school at 31 to study something kind of unheard of at that time. Like, let's talk about that for a second. You decided to study consciousness when now it's being talked about everywhere, but back then, not like saying you're old or anything, but back then it wasn't really the most popular thing to talk about.
That was 1997, I think, ish, give or take. And initially I went in, they only had the psychology program for the masters. And so I just did that. But in the process of doing that and getting out, I was doing therapy. I was doing couples and family systems therapy at that time. And I realized a couple things. The first thing is I realized that I love it. I just love doing it. But the second thing I realized is that traditional therapy, and it may be good for people, like some people, but I'm just saying traditional therapy is extremely restrictive from the therapist aspect. We can only do certain things. We can't really be an advocate for you. We can't be a teammate for you. We have to keep a very client therapist type of relationship. And there are laws. There are, certain standard procedures. I didn't like that and I kept getting into trouble because I kept wanting to get into the weeds with my clients.
Yeah.
And so I realized really quick that I didn't want to go the traditional way and go into the PsyD or the PhD programs. And that's when I found my program, which was through the philosophy department at International University. And it's kind of a hybrid, because we did a lot of studying on Eastern philosophies as well as like Western, the basic psychology stuff, meshed them all together. And it was called consciousness studies, because really what we studied was, the basic consciousness versus the sub versus the ego, and dealt with a lot of the philosophical stuff. And that intrigued me so much, to the point where that has really guided everything professional and personal for me, ever since I did that. And I love seeing now how it's being embraced.
Yeah.
The awareness stuff, the clarity stuff, the Eastern stuff is coming into play. Breath work. I love it. Right. All the mantras and,
it's so cool. Like consciousness studies is what life studies. It is life studies, right? Because it's why am I conscious of the things that I am? And why am I not? Why do I have this opinion? Because of my programming. Why is my ego coming in around this thing, right? If we can all become conscious about it,
it's
and
awareness.
trust
That's
the
all.
philosophies of life, and that these like brilliant philosophers have, they've almost like laid the map. If we only just trust it and live by their words and their teachings in our own modern world, of course. But yeah, I think consciousness studies is that that's life studies. It's awareness of your life.
It's awareness, it's clarity, it's the true understanding of what is and how you want to be. It gives you choice. It gives you choice in terms of, how do I want to be? How do I want to come across? What are my values? What are my ideals? How can I live a consistent life with consistent boundaries, and then continue to expand in that realm, while at the same time, and this is really important, benefiting everybody else around me and the world. Because that's really what it is. It's not just about your own journey expanding into space. It's about your journey expanding into the space, into complementary space, to provide some sort of a motivational or some sort of a flow where other people can kind of go along with that, or at least you're moving everything in that direction. And that's the key.
Oh, and that is like, drop the mic in that moment, because yeah, if we're not giving back to our communities in any way, if we're not giving back to Mother Earth, if we're not giving back to, the people that raised us, although that we're still uncovering so much trauma from the way that they raised us, we're still got to give back to that support system. Then what are we doing? Like, what the fuck is the point of being a human if we can't impact just in the slightest way someone else's experience here on the planet? Because this shit gets heavy. And you, Tony, for me, were such a huge influence in my life in my early 20s. I mean, you still are, but our friendship, and again, I will reiterate, human connection is important. And again, if you are attracted to a type of human, or you're attracted to a certain type of conversation, or you're attracted to a certain type of music that group of people likes as well, go explore them. Because if I would have never, explored Tony as a friend, I wouldn't have learned all that I did about myself. And I'm sure he can say the same about what I taught him.
Oh my God, exactly. Incredible amounts of back and forth, right? And this is all just because for some reason I'm sitting at Hula's, and all of a sudden we start talking about radio.
Yeah.
Right. That was it. That's all of a sudden we started talking about, and that was such a trip. That was like, and that was the beginning of it. But
thank you so much for coming on. You are so welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I mean, everybody knows you were on my show last week.
Yeah.
Right?
So we're going to make that announcement right now. I was on Tony's podcast called She Talks Confidence Podcast. Tell everyone where they can find that. And I also want you to briefly chat about your book and where people can buy your book.
The She Talks Confidence Podcast is now on every platform that you can possibly go to, that all the popular ones, as well as the YouTube video podcast. Now YouTube has a subdirectory of podcasts, and so that's where the videos is uploaded to there, and that's under Tony Dufresne PhD. It's just under my name, or I think you could probably just search She Talks Confidence Podcast, but it's out there. I think there's 8 now. I mean, between us and Surrounded by Idiots, I did like 300.
Yeah.
And so,
Wait, I went back last week after recording the podcast with you. I went back and started to look through different episodes.
Like the old ones, like the really old ones.
Yes. When I tell you,
oh God,
I talked about everything. I talked about my sex life. I talked about exploring bisexuality. I talked about, I mean, everything under the sun. And it's funny because I'm not in any way, there's no like reverb of that. I'm just like, it is what it is. I almost really admire and look back at young Lexi like, yes, I would talk about anything. And I just kind of owned it. So if you guys want to get weird, Google or look on SoundCloud, the Walk of Shame radio podcast, because there are still some old episodes.
Are some of the Walk of Shame still up?
Yep. There are
really?
still some old, I mean, they're going to be there forever. So like, hopefully I never run for president.
Hey, listen, with all the stuff that's happening now, that would be a benefit to you in talking about that and being who you are. And I got to tell you, I listened to a couple of the old ones a little while ago. I thought we knocked it out of the park.
No, they're so good.
I thought they were good.
No, they are. They are.
I mean,
so
legit good.
We should try to post some of them or some clips from them just because we talked about entrepreneurship. It's so interesting that was early on in my entrepreneur career because we talked about entrepreneurship a lot and a lot of the stuff, you know, I'm still working through and every entrepreneur will be able to relate to it. But we talked about moving to a new city and dating appropriate ages and what that even means. And you guys will really enjoy these episodes if you want to go back, and maybe I will pull some to post on this platform as well. And then Tony also has a book called Surrounded by Idiots, which I think is the best name ever. Yes. Where can they find your book?
Amazon.
Okay.
They can find it on Amazon. I had it. It's been out since 2018 and it's appropriate and poignant now as it was then. I mean, there's, really, it's a tongue-in-cheek thing. Surrounded by Idiots just means there's a bunch of people that'll drag you down. And it's a matter of you elevating above and gaining some clarity and walking your walk, doing your thing, and being empowered to do that by creating that base and that foundation and that level of true confidence.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Thank you for listening to the Walk of Shame. Oh my God. Thank you for listening to Wellness for the Hot Mess. I want to talk about relationships again.
You just harken back, right? We
got to go before I say some shit I'm going to regret.